So, welcome to my Let's Talk series where I interview experts on the topics of international life, raising children abroad with multiple cultures and languages. And today I have the great pleasure and honor to have Malwina Gudowska as my guest. Malwina Gudowska is the author of Mother Tongue Tied. You see the book in her background. On language, motherhood, and multilingualism, disrupting myths and finding meaning, published in 2024. She is a National Magazine Award winner, and her writing has appeared in Literary Hub, Vogue, Financial Times, The Globe, and Mail, and in several anthologies. She's also a PhD researcher in applied linguistics and explores the emotions of mothers raising multilingual children, and she's also a contributing editor for Mother Tongue magazine. She currently lives in London with her family of 4. Now, Malwina, the title of your book, I have it here as well, so let me show it. So, Mother Tongue Tied evokes actually the challenges of language loss, disconnection, and also the condition, right, of tongue tie and much more. Can you maybe share what made you choose this particular title?
Thank you for the introduction, first of all. And I love this question. So thank you for asking it, because it was very much a conscious and a very, titles are so important in books, but I thought about this a lot. And, as linguists, and not even as linguists, but mother tongue evokes so many images, and it's a very poetic term. And, most people know what it refers to. And so I knew I wanted to do something with that. But of course, as I go into the book a little bit deeper, it has also a very heavy connotation for many people. And so I wanted the tide there as well, the little play on words, having, how can something so kind of maybe innocent or beautiful also kind of be very much complicated. And my cover is inspired by artwork from the Polish School of Posters, which was really important to me. And that was a movement, very symbolic movement in the 50s to the 80s. And they worked with graphic design to kind of symbolize things that they couldn't say out loud. And that was a big part of why I wanted to do this. And even if you break down the title a bit, every word for me had so much powerful meaning. Mother obviously is the central theme of the book. The tongue is, something that I explore that, not all language uses the tongue. And I think a lot of people don't think about that. Language is multimodal. And then, of course, tied being that complicated, complex thing that, something tied can be untied, can be untangled. So I thank you again because I loved thinking about, so many of the inspirations. And I think what I mentioned in the book to one of the authors, I quote Yasmin Yildiz, she talks about the term mother tongue and how its connotation for the maternal body. And that was really something that spoke to me really profoundly as well. Kind of, again, that link between motherhood and language and what that means in the research and heritage languages. And then I think also one more thing was that the monolingual paradigm, I think, is often, conflated with mother tongue. So that, and something that I hope that my book shows is that, multiple languages, multilingualism. And so there doesn't have to be just one language or one, that primacy of that first language. It can go much beyond that.
Yes, absolutely. And the mother tongue is just the beginning, so to say.
Yes.
Now, you note also that mothers have double the impact on language exposure in your book. And they serve as the guardians of their children's true bilingualism or multilingualism, whatever this means. Right. So how has now becoming a parent for you reshaped your understanding of language use and identity? And you also talk about the effective resocialization after becoming a mother. And I think every mother goes through that. And being also a linguist and knowing what to expect and then seeing that everything might be slightly different or completely different is like a wake-up call or something that I think reshapes also who we are as a mother. But please tell us more about
absolutely.
this.
I think so. I thought I knew a lot. I have a journalism background as well, and I've written stories about multilingualism and language before I had children. My family immigrated to Canada. We were always exposed to multilingualism, multiculturalism. My father worked in the area as well, and so I thought I knew a lot, and then I had children, and it was just like, oh, it was something that was really kind of, everything became more acute and more poignant and more, I don't want to say it was an emergency, but I felt like, actually, oh my gosh, I don't know as much as I thought I knew. But in a way, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing either. Something that you just brought up and I mentioned in the book is, Aneta Pavlenko, who's a very well-known, renowned linguist, talks about in one of her articles about how that parents can actually be both agents and subjects of socialization. And basically what, that means, and what I take that to mean, is I'm shaping my children's language, but they're doing the exact same to me. And I think that, again, like exactly what you said, it's not just multilingualism. Once you transition into parenthood, in whatever form that is, and motherhood, it profoundly changes you. And then adding that language just adds another layer of what is going on now. Our children are their own people, and that really kind of surprised me, in both good and bad ways. And I think that's something that most parents can attest to, that it really changes you profoundly and teaches you things that you never expected. And that definitely goes for language and heritage language maintenance, and what I thought was important before, and what they think is important. And it's an ongoing, it's something that happens, of course, after the transition, but it's ongoing, which is something that I always try to remind myself. It changes all the time.
Absolutely. I would like to share quickly a slide. Let me just quickly see. So this is just to quote you. I'm sorry if I quote you. This is
okay,
actually something that I found very, very important in this context. At page 173, you say, our relationships with our children are governed by ideals and ideas of what mothering should be, or how we should speak or communicate. And just as a mother may consider using anything but her first language with her child for emotional communication unfathomable, the notion of first language primacy can also contribute to the guilt felt by mothers attempting to raise multilingual children in a language learned later in life. It is not always one or the other, and yet we are also damned if we do and damned if we don't. I really like this. But what I wanted to emphasize here is, well, sometimes we choose the first language that we were exposed to, and sometimes we choose maybe the other first language, or maybe a additional language that we learned later and that we are most fluent in, proficient in at the moment when we have children, right?
Absolutely.
You also mentioned the intensive mothering, right?
Yeah, and you and I think we've talked about a little bit briefly on this before, but just my own experience is, like you said. So, for example, my Polish is my first language, but it's definitely not my dominant one, because I grew up in Canada, and I think that's something that plays into it as well, that many caregivers and parents can attest to. Why do I have that strong connection with my first language, and yet it's not necessarily my dominant one? And am I, there's that whole idea of, am I romanticizing, this connection? But also it's this idea of the damned if you do and the damned if you don't, is like, when I talk to other mothers, they know that they want, for example, to pass on their heritage language, the first language, and yet there are so many other factors that influence that, and it's almost like, okay, you're doing this wonderful thing, and then all these other things are happening, and then what about the school language, and what about this other language? So I think there's some really wonderful research about this idea of connecting this to good and bad parenting, and again, within the context of language. But when you mention the idea of intensive mothering, it's something that one of a writer, Hannah Irving Torsch, talks about. How does that, in general, the idea of intensive mothering, play into heritage language maintenance? And Are we taking on this idea that mothers have to do it and be it all and do it all at the same time? And yet we are still, even though we're doing these amazing things, still feeling this guilt and this frustration. And sometimes being told that, this is a sign of good parenting or this is a sign of bad parenting. And yet, again, that you can't win. And that sounds that sounds really, kind of negative. But I think, again, the knowledge of that can actually empower us, because if we know that, there's all these other layers and all these other influences, we can actually kind of think about that all the time, that it's not just on us and it's not just something that we are responsible for 100%. Yes. I don't know if that touches on the intensive mothering and the
Yes.
damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to just quickly see a comment by Monica from who's following us on LinkedIn. Would you put a limit on the number of languages a child should be brought up in? My 4-year-old is currently exposed to learning 4 languages, give or set up.
You can kind of after attest to this. The thing with the how many languages is, someone told me this years ago. And they said, there's no limit. It's just that there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much time in life in day to day. We can get deeper into this kind of topic of, how children acquire languages and that sort of thing. But I think in my perspective, and I guess to do with my book, is, again, as a caregiver and as the parent, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit more. When you think of it as physical and mental load and labor, again, there's only so much you can do and you can foster. I mean, I think there shouldn't be a limit. And a few of the mothers that I've interviewed for some of my academic research, speak 3 or use 3, 4, 5, but they often tell me that they end up being the ones that have to ensure that all the languages have enough input, enough exposure. And that in itself is an incredibly physical and emotional and mental load.
Yes, I think. Thank you very much, Monica, for this question. I think it's also right to talk about this at this point of the interview, because when we say about intensive mothering, it always depends also on not only how many hours we have in the day, but also what our goals are with every single language. So there might be, or there will always be 1 or maybe 2 that we can really foster intensively, and the others less. And this should never make us also feel less adapt or less successful with transmitting them. So I think the goals are the first thing to think about. Is it also the right moment right now? Can I do it? Do I have to do it? Does my child really need these languages right now? And how do I introduce them? In the background or with really one-on-one conversations? And how do I get my child to reach a certain level of fluency so that we can have this conversation in the first place? So we can have these conversations, and I personally enjoy these conversations with my children that are multilingual. So we can switch from one language to the other, but that's many years of work. It is a pleasure, but it's also work. So you were mentioning just before, Malwina, that it is mothering in itself comes with so many expectations, not only about language, but with many other things as well. And you also describe in your book the experience of multilingual child rearing as this invisible labor, right? Like it is described by Toshio Kita. Could you elaborate, Matt, on how this emotional labor actually is often overlooked, especially when performed by mothers, which seems to be the case? It really makes me a bit angry, to be honest. So to see that even after almost 40 years that I read the first or the research about this, and I said, okay, come on, in 10 years this is over. No, it's still there. So, and in this context, you also mention the gendered notion of home that links with the gendered caregiving role of a mother. So can you please explain how this emotional labor now is overlooked when performed by mothers?
So talking about, so when I funny you say that with the timing. When I read one of the first linguistics kind of studies that I read when I was thinking about pursuing kind of this work and this more research was Toshio Kita's, and it's from 2002, I believe, and it's called Invisible Labor, about Japanese mothers who are raising their children in the UK with British partners. So the mothers are the ones that are, trying to, some of them actually end up not doing it, but which is fascinating in its own self, but pass on Japanese to their children. And when I read that book, it was life-changing in that my language and motherhood context, because something she mentions and that other studies have now gone on to look at is, what do they mean by invisible labor? Well, when you're the only, especially in a situation when pretend you're the only partner that uses that one language, it's a little bit different when both partners are able to both use the same language, but you are the one that is constantly monitoring, constantly reminding, constantly going back and forth. Something that Okita says, you're the dual teacher and the mother. And even translation, I think about all the time, this idea that you're translating for your children, but also on the playground. You don't want other children to feel excluded. You want your children to forge relationships. So then you're translating for other people that, and this is all effort, and it's a wonderful effort. And I think, again, it's not necessarily a negative thing always, but I think if we look at it as labor and a load, then you can see how it can be an incredibly heavy emotional and physical burden. And so I think, Okita's work, and then work of other scholars and writers that have talked about this, is so important, because you'll always have that one person in the Facebook group or in the comment section. I had one person, when I wrote an article years ago about this, saying, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. It's so easy. Raising multilingual children is so easy." And then in this specific case, I think I actually mentioned this in the book, the man was monolingual and his wife was the one that was passing on the heritage language. So I'm like, oh yes, of course. But, and then I think acknowledging that it is this invisible labor can actually then, you can look for support systems and resources. I often think about, I know a lot of languages, with Polish, I'm incredibly lucky that it's very accessible storybooks for children, for example. But some language parents can't, necessarily access books in their target language because they're small. They're minoritized languages. They don't. It's too expensive to get books shipped from that country. And I just think about those parents at the end of the night after a long day trying to translate children's books. And I'm like, oh gosh, you're already so tired. And then, you're trying to their favorite book in English or whatever language, and you're trying to translate it in your target language. And it's that thought is exactly kind of how that tiredness of caregiving and motherhood and trying to keep that language alive.
Yes, it is. It is an amazing and considerable cognitive workout, especially when we keep supporting the different languages at home, like you said, not only one, but maybe 2, 3, Absolutely. And then the ones in the community, and we translate for the people around us so that they don't feel threatened by us speaking our language with our child. And I think that makes it a little bit underestimated by everyone. Absolutely. People think, okay, you speak your language and that's just it. No, it's just a little part of it.
Just a little part.
And yes, it's quite, and yep.
No, I was just going to say when I think maybe that you'll touch upon this, but I think that I just kind of was looking at my notes, and you did actually ask about me, this domestic space, and I didn't touch upon that. Yes. But it kind of goes hand in hand with this. I talk about this a lot in the book about, again, then if you're calling the heritage language a home language, how does that equate with the domestic space of caregiving and motherhood? And is that language, that's why I don't love the idea of the home language in a sense, because then does it equal just that space? And it has connotations. Everything kind of has a layered meaning. And then, how does that translate to how people consider it? Is it just for the home? And which it shouldn't, of course, it's not. But yeah. And then, of course, another layer is that reflection of being the good or bad parent, depending on what you do.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, just a helicopter. I don't know what's going on here in the background, but anyway.
I like it, yeah.
Can I just share? Let me try again to share this. Now it's working. This other part where you talk about space and spatial.
Yeah.
So, actually, this one. So if mothers are the perceived agents of language loss are held responsible solely for heritage language maintenance and development. The home is the space, yes, and the mother is the body. I like this analogy. And also the chapter where you talk about this totally made sense, but let's go ahead. But will be held accountable where language loss, language shift, and language attrition may occur. So rarely are outside sources, like you just said, often working against the mother and the home, acknowledged as affecting factors. It's an unjust oversimplification because our private and public spaces unceasingly intersect. And not only when we are out and about, but it's also when we are receiving friends over, they come over and we translate, we make sure that everyone is understood, that there are not misunderstandings, misconceptions, or judgments made. We create that space, yes, at home, but the space expands over the world, so to say. Everywhere we go with our children, whether it be in the community we live, in the different places, formal settings, informal settings, and different countries. So that's quite more complex than this simple home and community language. I fully agree with you. And I mean, there are social linguistics definitions, also the micro society and the meso and macro society, but they all don't exist as bubbles. We are constantly in contact with each other, and that makes it so complex also. Where we can't say, okay, if you are in that situation, you behave or you do it like this. And when you are in that situation, this is what, no, because the situation changes depending on the people, on the context and everything. Now, Malwina, you have gathered data about 270 mothers around the world. And during your interviews, it seems that frustrations to be a common denomination. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so it's a part of the research that I'm doing now, and hopefully trying to do some academic papers around it. But it was a privilege to be able to gather this information from a wide source through a questionnaire. And I think it ties really beautifully into your last interview with Inga and Egle and their work on Lithuanian mothers. But I mean, again, we're hearing, the patterns of frustration and guilt, which, I mean, it's become so kind of common that, these, thankfully they're sharing, because I think that's really, really important. Like I've already mentioned, if we don't talk about it, then nobody will know that they're not alone. But definitely the frustration and guilt around, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Why are they not using the target language? I mean, on social media, even I see so many incredible and wonderful accounts, trying to educate, but also kind of dealing with this. And so many people constantly write in, why is my child not responding in the target language? And so I think, there are so many common stories and so many similar kind of parallels and themes across motherhood, depending, in many different areas. There's, whether you're in a very multilingual, whether you're using 4 languages or 2. But I think one of the things that I wanted to mention also, that yes, there's this guilt and frustration, but there's also a lot of joy. And I think that we don't talk about that enough as well, like the successes and the small victories that I think people should also focus on. So yes, we should talk about the guilt and the frustration and what's happening there, and how do we get these, caregivers, mothers, some support, but also to really acknowledge the celebration and the joy. Like, I mean, I think, something that I write about in the book, and that happens often in my home, yes. I forget a word in Polish, and one of my children reminds me, and it's like, amazing. And it's just such a, to the outside viewer, it could be such a small thing, but it's such a wonderful thing that actually, there is something going on they know something that I don't. You know, they watch a lot of media in Polish, so like a lot of slang that I don't know because I didn't grow up in Poland, and it's incredible. And I think I want to make sure to amplify those stories as well. That there are those, you know, we talk about what's enough. You know, some mothers will say, well, it doesn't matter if they read or write, as long as they can just speak. Or and I think that's important too. But rather than this enough, maybe go a little further. I mean, actually, that's really, really great. And you've had all these other influences in your life and all these other pushbacks. And yet, look what you and your children are doing together. And I think it's important just as much as talking about the guilt and the frustration.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's the two sides of the medal, right? Seeing always the positive things make some people think there is no negative part, and then when they see the negative part, they think they are failing. Whereas knowing there's always two sides of the medal, anyways. But also to know that you're not the only one, and actually what you're doing is already more than many others are doing. So it is enough already. Well, yeah, I could talk about this in detail, but let's just go to the next part, because what do you think are now the biggest misconceptions people have about maintaining a heritage language while adapting to a dominant culture?
I mean, there are so many that for some reason just live on and like they just get perpetuated. And I don't understand how, when you have so much research, they don't get confused. Children will not be confused. Delays it's not caused by as we know. One of the ones that I think is, for me, was, again, I think, I've already kind of touched upon this, but it's not linear and it changes all the time. It changes while your children age. It changes domains, where context of language, how they use it. It changes as you change and you adapt, and situations adapt. So I think that's really, for me, I think, again, it goes back to that idea of the constant monitoring, in that it's really actually, a lot of when you ask parents, a lot of them will quote the OPAL, one language, one parent, and that's a very good strategy and a very important one. But I think the more and more that our world changes and the more languages that come in, we have to kind of also think about, how do we make it all work? It's not going to just be cut in the middle. And I think one of the things that I kind of was thinking about with this question was this idea of, some families are really concerned about balanced bilingualism. And I think that's really important, but it doesn't have to be, 50-50. And there will be times that it will be, there will be times that won't be. I mean, often it won't be, because that's really very impossible, because there's different, like we talked about, domains of language and contexts and ages and development in children. But I think, keeping those all in mind, that it can't totally 100% be balanced. It's not linear. And it changes all the time, I think. But I hope that the big ones that keep just really affecting parents, that especially parents that aren't, that aren't necessarily up to the research, that I really hope that those go away soon. Yeah.
Yes, it would be great if it were going to disappear, and that it would be considered as normal, that this balance, that you say, is just an illusion. It's just a snapshot of a moment, because in the end, I mean, we learn the languages for different purposes, for different people and different domains of life, to various extent, like Grosjean has already said many times. So in these studies, and if someone wants to look it up, there is a complementary principle by Grosjean that illustrates it very nicely. But let's now talk maybe about the situations where multilinguals are celebrated. In the past 10-ish years or so, we can observe a shift towards more language-friendly schools. I will link to their website in the comments on YouTube, and to more language-inclusive school settings and also communities. So multilingualism is often celebrated, provided it doesn't interfere with a dominant societal language, and this is also something that you can observe in the research. Yet this can lead to accentism and discrimination, Now, how can we now balance embracing the linguistic diversity with challenging societal bias against non-standard accents?
Yeah, when I was thinking about this a lot, I mean, I think I mentioned that I defer to the brilliant, Ingrid Pillar's work on linguistic justice, and there was one part in her book that was really, again, I had to read it 3 times. To linguistic diversity does not equal equality and linguistic justice. So, and in fact, sometimes this idea of linguistic diversity, when we're saying we're so multilingual, is in fact a way of, again, making it highlighting the differences, ironically, which is unfortunate. But, we celebrate multilingualism, and yet, if you look a little bit deeper, only certain languages are valued, or certain accents are, praised, and certain are discriminated against. And it's really, I think, yes, absolutely keep the message alive that linguistic diversity is, important, and it's a goal, and multilingualism is normal and common. But I think we all need to kind of look a little bit deeper, in our own language ideologies. How do we value languages, even in the most innocent, I say innocent, but, when somebody says, well, I think I'm going to try to get my child to learn this language because I think it's more valuable. Well, valuable for whom, and valuable in what ways? And I think, these are such ingrained ideas of, years and years of thinking about language. So I think we have to move beyond this idea of just that linguistic diversity is happening and it's great. Okay, it is, but also, are you sure that it is actually diversity, and is it actually equality, and is it actually justice, or is it just kind of you're painting a picture over top and not really? I've been reading a lot of work, of course, racial linguistics, how what people look like, perceive what they sound like. There's lots of studies now about, the same person, different photos, the same voice, saying the same thing, and people judging them very differently depending on the photo they see. These are fascinating, but really, kind of I give shivers when I talk about it, because I think it's so powerful to really make sure that, and I see it, and we see it on social media, in the cute way my father or mother says a word, and and everyone's giggling, and and imitating accents, and and it doesn't have to all be very serious, but I think it is important to make sure, okay, you love this accent, but then why do you say that you hate this accent, or you think this is a thick accent, but thick for you? And then, going back to, this idea of, I mean, we can talk about this all day, but
I think we need to dedicate a whole other discussion to accents. I have several meanings about that, and also very playful ways, because I like to play with accents, but without judging. I actually like to play around with the different sounds. It's like using your hands and forming something. You just use your mouth to form new sounds and to do that. So this is for me the playful way, and I hope also the acceptable way for others. But if it's not, I can always explain it. But in your book now, you also touch the generational transmission of language and culture. And now, as someone who also grew up abroad and raised children in another abroad too, I know first and secondhand now as well what it means to transmit that feeling of belonging or not belonging, actually how it feels like, even if you want to belong and you don't because others say so, and the struggles and the doubts that come with the whole package. So in your opinion and experience, how can parents now ensure that their children feel connected to their heritage language and heritage culture, while also developing then the strong ties to their local environment? Because actually this is what we do. We said it before, we do translate with those who are locals and who might not understand our language, etc. But we are constantly shifting back and forth between the different worlds. So what is your opinion and experience about that?
Yeah, I think, one of the big things that I always say is support systems, because again, when I talk about motherhood and doing it alone and the physical and burden, and there's so many different ways. I mean, again, of course, it depends on where you live and the languages that you're trying, the target languages. But if it's possible, trying to find as many support systems as you can. And then when I mean support systems, of course, if you can have peer groups, if you can have family around, if not FaceTime, resources of books, media, even something like I loved writing the chapter about food and in my book, and going to visit Poland. My children don't have the same connection to Poland that I did, but we try. And again, it's not always possible, absolutely not with travel. But I think, trying to find these other ways of incorporating little parts, cultural and linguistic parts, that I think, I often talk to my children about how it's not necessarily, we have a lot of friends that are multilingual, so not necessarily Polish, but they speak other languages at home. And I love that, because I think we talk about how, actually this friend speaks this language and this friend. So even fostering that love of languages and multilingualism as well. And then that can actually, I think, help a little bit with balancing that dominant societal and linguistic with your heritage or home language. And I do want to mention something that I've said before, and it goes back to a really wonderful article by Sabine Little that I think about all the time, about whose heritage are we talking about. And I think it's good to remember that our children's heritage isn't our heritage, and we can do as much as we can. And of course we can, this idea of roots, or we can give them, things that we think is really important. But in the end, hopefully they will take what they need or what they want. But we're different people, and I think that's not a negative thing. To me, that's a very comforting thing, that there's only, there's lots we can do and lots of support systems and resources. But in the end, we just hope that they come to it at some point. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then also realizing that, yes, we are not only just another generation than them. So the world that we saw, or the country like we experience it, is completely different from what they see now. I mean, everything changes also between generations. So even if you stay in the same place, it's not the same.
That's exactly.
But then if you are living abroad and you bring them there maybe for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or if you're lucky 4 or more per year, it's just that little bit that you can transmit and that they can absorb, so to say. And you try to do your best. And then what they pick out of the culture and the language can differ between the siblings too, right? And what I find very, very nice there, and it's actually like a project as a family, to see how you can define your multilingual family culture.
Oh, I love that.
And the heritage. You do like a new picture that is your family picture, and everyone brings something to the picture, and without judging, without saying, oh yeah, but I don't like that dish, for example, or I don't like that accent from that region. But that's something that we need to accept. Everyone has their different ways of seeing things, perceiving things, experiencing things. So I think it's very nice to draw this new family picture from scratch somehow.
Absolutely. And even just, you probably, as the children get older, you can actually engage them in discussions. That's exactly onto that point.
Very much.
Yeah, where you're not the only one. Obviously, when they're toddlers and they're babies, and you have more, the language acquisition's happening and stuff. But then when they get, even 5, 6, 7, around my children's age, a little bit older, is you can have these incredible discussions on, what does that mean to you? What is this language? Why is this, or why is it important for me? Sometimes I say, well, this isn't because, if they say, well, I don't, well, it's important for me because, and then hopefully.
Yes, and it's important for me, it's important for us, but they are individuals who have the right to decide as well. So the more we resist also as parents, the more they might resist us and what we want to do. I would like to share quickly 2 comments and questions. One is Le Kids Kalam. who's following us on YouTube. I find it so sad when parents who worry about their child's accent in the minority language give up transmitting the language because the child has a thick accent, so doesn't speak it well. Yes, it's a very sad situation. Absolutely, I completely agree. So I find any kind of accent is like a fingerprint. And a part of the fact that you can also work a little bit on your accent if you want to, but actually it is part of who we are and who our children are.
And I think also knowing that, maybe even reading or hopefully giving the parents resources that just even, on phonology and how every language that we speak will influence the next language. So, this goes back again to this idea of this first language, native language, this, I don't like to use that term obviously, but just that's not how, even just biological. Yeah. Anyway, I think just giving parents those kind of resources to know that actually they sound exactly like they would because they speak another language that you didn't as a child, or that. And maybe that knowledge can be a bit of power, and hopefully.
And actually, it can also change over time. It's not because a child has a certain accent at some point of their language acquisition, of the additional language, they will retain it. My son, at some point when he started learning English, all of a sudden all his Italian r's disappeared and were replaced by the English r, which sounded really very, very interesting. I found it interesting. I didn't judge it, but I knew he's
wrote it
able.
down. You were like, this is a good case study.
It's very nice. It's very nice. And now he's mixing them, and he plays around with that. I would like to share another question also from Mia Anderson. Thank you I was following us on LinkedIn. My mother tongue is Danish and my husband is Spanish. My kids grew up in Sweden, and if you ask them, the language they want to use most is Swedish. Yes, we have that as well, I have to say. It seems like they have chosen their own. Now we moved to Portugal a half year ago, and they already speak it very well in school. The teacher said, maybe it will change. Yes, it could change. Or will they always have the Swedish as their chosen language? We cannot tell. I think if you could travel throughout time in the future, you could maybe have a look. But it can also be that your children, one child, I don't know how many children you have, but that one child prefers to keep Swedish somehow. Often it's maybe the older children who have spent more time in a certain country and have also been schooled in that language. So the instructional language was that they prefer maintaining it. But you never know. You really never know. And sometimes they want to even fit in when they are older. And so they completely switch to the new language because they want to be cool and be part of the peer group. I think we're going to talk about this in a moment as well, right? The importance of the peer group.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's more and more important as the children grow up.
Yeah. And again, maybe it depends again with their connections, I guess. How will you foster the connections to Swedish friends and to or the friends from Sweden or the Swedish because because Danish and Spanish. But yeah, I mean, it depends on age. Like Ute said, you never know. And I would love to hear you can mention, in a little bit because it's fascinating to me how different children change different ways. And again, siblings, it could be very different. And the peer group is incredibly important. And sometimes, especially as kids get older, it gets even more important. And I think that goes back to why I'm hoping that, trying to show that so many other children are multilingual. It doesn't have to be in the exact same target language, can hopefully foster that peer group acceptance. Yes. I was one of the only ones I remember growing up in Canada, although we had a very big Polish community, an immigrant community that we spent a lot of time with in my regular, it was a bilingual French immersion English school. I was, I think, one of the only ones in my class that spoke a different language at home. you do. I remember feeling, oh, don't speak to me Polish in front of the kids, or and so my kids are actually kind of the opposite. They like that. They actually, I sometimes worry that they were rude because they like to speak the Polish when they don't want the other people to understand. So it can go both ways. It can go both ways.
Yes, yes. I had the same behavior when I was a child in Italy. I didn't want my mother to speak
Yeah,
German with me in front of my Italian friends at all.
that's interesting. Yeah,
We have
absolutely.
another comment from Pamela to Mia now. I have realized that children choose what they feel like their mother tongue, or maybe the term as mother tongue is always a bit tricky. Is it the first language or the most dominant language at
Dominant,
that
exactly.
moment? Maybe. She also adds, at home, the languages are Dutch, Papiamento in Spanish. Oh, nice combination. But the strongest is English. So it's a peer group. Same in my family as well. And she adds,
Okay.
of my youngest daughter, meanwhile, instruction language at school is Dutch. So that was English as a peer group, but the youngest daughter has that, and the language in school is Dutch.
So
So
wonderful.
you're in the Netherlands. Yes, it is. I think it's very, very interesting from the point of view of a parent to see also how the children react to the different languages and which ones they prefer, which ones they don't like that much. And sometimes it's not what we wish for, but it's just how everything goes. Like with everything else as well. The sports that they prefer, the food they prefer, the vegetables or fruit or whatever. So, I mean, what clothes they like to wear and what not. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so I would like to go ahead because in your research and the writing process, what stories or insights actually stood out the most to you about the psychological and also the social impact of multilingualism, particularly with the families living abroad?
Yeah, we've a little bit touched about this already, but again,
Yes.
this idea of the guilt, the frustration, the children not, necessarily using the target language, but of course the victories and the joy. I think a lot of it is very much prevalent in kind of mothering, again, as we said already, caregiving, kind of very similar. You just add that language and it adds another complex layer. But, some things that I try to always, if I'm speaking to somebody, I kind of sometimes offer my own personal experience that, even knowing research and knowing that, sometimes the other day I said to one of my children, I've asked you 25 times to speak Polish back. And it wasn't 25. It was, I think I noted, but it was probably third or fourth time. And it's a good reminder that it happens all the time and it continues to happen. And again, I think there's power in not feeling alone and knowing that other parents are going through this, that it is a very common thing, that there are ways to, redirect the language. There are ways to resources and support system. And I think that's why I wanted to write this book, in the sense of the research is so important, but sometimes it doesn't get to the people in time, or it doesn't get to the right people. And I was hoping that, a more general kind of audience could relate to some of the things that are happening for them in their multilingual families. But, having that research as the backup, that actually it's absolutely normal. It's absolutely okay. This evidence base, we've done studies on this, but also there are so many other people that are going through the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and also a little bit looking maybe for the validation of what we're doing, not necessarily from the outside, but also from our children. I found this very powerful to see that when they realize I actually am quite good and I can function in different settings, not necessarily effortlessly, but almost in a natural way. I think that is the best feedback that we can get. And the others, I would switch them off or turn them silent, like, oh, they're just talking.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not that important in the end, is how our children are reacting and how they are dealing with this situation that they grow up in and what they do out of this, what they do with all the languages. Now, we're talking a little bit about the academic research and the lived experiences, right? What are now, based on your experience, I have mine and we can share it, the major gaps between these lived experiences of multilingual families and the academic research?
Yeah, I think again, sometimes the research doesn't get down to the people that need it most, that's a critique in academia anyway. It kind of stays out. And
that's part.
Absolutely. Or, it's interesting coming from a journalism background, because I'm very aware of how when the studies do get, in mainstream media, what are the headlines? What are the, I think it was the study with the double exposure. It was a great study, I think, out of Montreal, I think, Concordia. Apologies if that's wrong, but and I think the headline was "Mothers have double," and again, okay, so that's the headline, but what are people? And sometimes, often people don't read further down, and so I think we have to always be careful how, and again, beyond linguistics, everything, how we translate into media, and what is clickbait, and what is making sure that we're reading everything. And I always say, try to get to the study if you can. If it's something that's really important and you want to read more about, try to actually read the real study, not just some of the highlights. And I think we getting better, I think. And I know there's a lot of research now coming into linguistic, kind of the diversity in families. So what is a family even? Are we looking at different types of families, not just heteronormative? I'm looking in some of my research, really interesting, on parents that have actually separated, and how that affects heritage language maintenance. And I think that's really important to study different families, different contexts beyond, the global north. Obviously, that's, a given in so much. Where children use multiple languages every day. There are many places in the world that is absolutely the norm. And so I think it's important to see what's happening there, which I know again is starting to, I think also with the gap between academic and lived, we're still seeing those, some of those old studies come back to haunt us that, weren't done well, had very limited participants, didn't control for certain things. I think that's, again, another topic for another time, but I can think of a few off the top of my head that, children are behind, or the word gap, or that sort of thing, where actually all that, if you look back really with a little bit of a magnifying glass, you don't have to be, right there in there, but just more critical, and making sure that, I always say we're all humans, and even experts, things change. It's a wonderful kind of way to metaphor kind of, it's like language, things change, research tools change, and just making sure that we are interpreting things in the way that is accurate and factual, and then because we know all the good things about multilingualism, because there is lots of evidence, and there's lots of resources with social media. It's incredible. Like I said, the language influencers, there's language influencers that do a lot of work. Hopefully they're, it's not always somebody that you need, but like, it's a good starting point, and then keep going and finding, the research and the experts, and
it's difficult sometimes to distinguish what should I follow, what should I listen to, and what should I actually avoid or not listen to.
That's true.
One thing that I'm going to quote in a moment, also someone who is following us, but something that I find the most, not challenging, but I miss the studies about really multilingual families that have 2 to 3 languages at home, yes, in the space of home, but also then in the community, plus other languages in the community, who juggle more than 2, 3, 4 languages on a daily basis. And also this reality is part of the school settings, right? We have school classes with 20 different home languages, but maybe even more, and where these home languages are not necessarily fostered to the extent that people think. So these children are maybe receptive multilinguals in those home languages, or because they are in this transition, becoming more fluent and proficient in the school language, they struggle with the home languages. But a lot of research assumes that these children are perfect, whatever this means, it's not possible, but that they are able to talk about all kind of topics, subject areas included from school, also in their home language, which is just not the reality. And that they can read and write effortlessly without, they know how to spell whatever other alphabet they might use at home. This is not very realistic either. So then, as I said, also the research on mobile families, autonomous families, etc. But I could go on and on with this. So I think there is a lot of things that we still have to cover and that should be covered. So let's keep on doing the things.
Keep doing it. Yeah. Having these conversations. Yeah. Keep talking about it. It's wonderful. And it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I would like to quickly quote, let me just say, I cannot share all the comments that you have shared here, I'm sorry, but Monica says, I think now the approach to multilingualism has changed, and I think this goes nicely with what we are just saying. There's more and more mixed families and couples, which is amazing. It's hard. Actually, in our daughter's daycare in Switzerland, I would say the monolingual kids are the minority group. Wow. Exactly. So in Switzerland, you have a multilingual situation anyways, but well, it always depends also on where you are and what is meant. But all kids have lots of languages at home. And yes, I think this is something that the reality that we have to describe more or to analyze more. I would love to do a research about that. Maybe I'm going to start one. I don't know.
And exactly what you said at the beginning also, with your work and your work with families, what are the goals and which ones, because, I kind of simplified it by saying there's not enough minutes, but like you said, which ones are, having that discussion and that awareness of what is important or what is in the moment, and it can change at any time.
Yes. I come back on screen a little bit more, and I would like to quote also Lekitz Kalam, who's saying, as a speech therapist, thank you very much for adding this. I find that the parents that consult me have the most hard time with balancing, embracing the child's languages positively and keeping up the transmission of their native language. I think this is a big thing. We have touched a little bit about on the fact that some languages are just not considered as important as others, or as prestigious as others, also dialects, etc. And I think it's also a conversation that parents need to have at home. We had it. We also have one of these languages as one of our family or home languages, however you want to define them. And I remember myself also saying, but it will not help our children because there are no other speakers of this language around us. And it will be very, very hard to maintain it. But then we decided to solve the problem in another way, by visiting more often and by having a FaceTime and actually just enjoying it as a day in the week where we would talk this language, use this language more intensively. Let me just quickly have a look. I feel again that this is Pamela again. There is a nice chat with the comments. I fully agree, and they don't take into consideration that there might be parents that cannot write or read in their own language exactly, which justifies the receptive multilingualism. And I want to. This is actually something that I never shared, but I had a teacher in my children's school. It's not her fault, but we come from Switzerland, and she said, okay, now you can do something in Swiss German to my son. And I told her he can't. And she said, but yes, he can. He can bring a text and he can write it. And I said, sorry, but Swiss German is not a written language. We use it. You speak it, you hear it when you're in the Swiss German speaking part of Switzerland, but we do not write it. So it's very, And it was a back and forth. And then she said, oh, then you don't need it. And I said, please don't say this in front of my child. It was not what I had wished for. But again, especially when it is about languages that are not written or that you cannot read, but also parents who maybe are not in the position to read that language anymore. There is something like analphabétisme de retour, returning analphabetism. Is it that one? Okay, that is a real thing. I mean, I just recently read an article about people, adults, parents, not reading as much as many years ago. So they read less and less and very short texts. They do not read a novel anymore, for a whole book anymore. So this is a reality that we have to face as well. But Malwina, I'm very aware the hour is almost up.
I just wanted to say, Pamela, that justifies, that caught my word, because I also think that that's we shouldn't have to justify as well, like the receptive, which justifies, which I completely understand the comment, but it's I mean, receptive bilingualism is bilingualism, and absolutely, like you said. So I think even the idea that we have to somehow, but anyway, I'm going to end. I'm going to stop, because we could talk all day.
No. There is so much food for thought, and for so many other conversations now. And we could go on and talk about this multifaceted multilingualism that we have to deal with. But I would like to still just try to sum it up in some way. So we said that raising multilingual children is work. It's actually quite a great cognitive and physical work, really, and that we can feel sometimes like, I would say, Sisyphus, right? Like taking 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. And it's surely not a linear process, like you said. It resembles a little bit like a knot, but hopefully not a Gordian knot.
Exactly.
That language dominance shifts over time for obvious reasons. We improve our language skills, our children improve their language skills, and we constantly also regularly adjust the sails, so to say, set new goals. 100%. We emphasized also that societies embracing linguistic diversity and multilingualism is helping us to some extent. And in an ideal world, we would not criticize languages deemed less prestigious, but be more curious about them. And we also touched about raising the awareness about linguistic biases, to do something about it and to work on it. Because if we are not aware of our biases, we just take it as it is, and you think it's normal, and it's not. There's so much more to say.
I thought that was wonderful. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Malwina, for taking the time to talk about raising multilinguals. That entails what it entails for mothers, societies, and actually everyone. And thank you also for writing this book that I really recommend. And I'm sure I would like to have you back on screen about other topics that are there.
This is so fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much also to everyone who followed us live, and those who are maybe watching the recording. Please share with us your thoughts, and let's continue the conversation in the comments, in the comment section on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. Thank you very much. I wish everyone a very nice day, which today, the 27th of March, is actually the International Day of Multilingualism.
Yes, amazing.
So let's celebrate the languages.
Love it. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for everyone, Tifrin.
Bye.